Parents tried to erase their teenage daughter's life as though she never existed. It took 2 years for a missing persons report to be filed, and this was only due to another of their children vanishing. It turned out that these siblings had witnessed something that they didn't speak of for many years, something that still hasn't been solved today. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, and today's case is about Monique Daniels and her disappearance, as well as her sister's disappearance, and the many years of nothing happening in this case, no sort of investigation, and what has come from that. And it's just a very wild case where we have answers, but we don't know how true they are, and we don't have any sort of charges or really any investigation to look into. So let's go ahead and get into the story. I also want to thank our longtime sponsor and my personal favorite, Ana Luisa. These jewelry pieces are not only timeless and beautiful, but they have such good quality that I never take them off. Literally, I wear them 24/7 in the shower, working out, it doesn't matter, and they hold up. These little heart guys are the ones that I've been wearing since I showed you them in February, and I have not taken them off, and I'm still loving them. And for such long-lasting pieces that you know you can invest in, they're starting at only $39, and with my code McKenna20, you can get 20% off. There seriously has never been an Ana Luisa piece that I have not immediately got and immediately worn, because I just love it that much. In fact, these came in the mail. These 2 rings came in the mail a few weeks ago, and I have not taken them off since I put them on. You don't have to compromise quality for price, and that is what I adore about Ana Luisa. So use the code McKenna20 for 20% off, or click the link down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1993 in Oklahoma, and a woman named Leslie calls into the Moore Police Department about a missing persons case. Now, she wanted to inquire about an investigation of her niece's disappearance, the case of Monique Daniels. Now, Leslie wanted to get her added to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. However, to do that, she needed a report from the missing persons file, and so she had actually asked Monique's mother for the report number, and her mother said she was going to get it, but she was busy and not getting back to her, so Leslie just kind of went to the police herself. However, the police department had no record of this disappearance and definitely no report, and this was 7 months since Leslie had seen her niece. She believed there was this active search going on, but that never existed, and Detective Terrence Coleman, who had no idea this 15-year-old had vanished, believed it was suspicious enough at this point to start an investigation, but it wasn't going to be solved easily because it had been so many months since she actually vanished. You see, back in 1992 in Oklahoma, the Daniels family lived in Moore, and this was Candace and Charles, who went by Chuck. Now, Charles was a sergeant in the Air Force at the Tinker Air Force Base, and Candace was also in the military, but they had 6 children together in their care, and Candace had 4 children prior to this marriage, and so then they had 2 children together, so altogether they had 6, but the oldest child was 15-year-old Monique Christine. And then they had Angelique, Andrew, Brian, Charles Jr., and then another child that I was unable to find the name of. Now, on June 2nd of 1992, the mother, Candace, was returning home with 2 children, Angelique and Brian, from their week-long church tour where they were actually touring with the choir, and Candace was with them the whole time. So she had taken 2 kids, Chuck was home with the other 4, and when Candace got home, Chuck had told her that their oldest child, Monique, was gone. A neighbor claimed that he had seen her getting into a blue Chevrolet pickup truck, putting her clothes inside, and then he had also seen the man in the driver's seat, which was believed to be Caucasian. That is all that was stated to Leslie about that day of the disappearance. Monique Christine, who actually went by Nikki by friends and family, had been born on June 16th of 1976 in Mississippi to Candace and her first husband, who was Burton Kenneth Landman. Now, she was their first child, and they went on to have 3 more children together. However, Burton was in and out of prison and was said to physically and sexually abuse the children, especially Monique, when he still lived with them. Now, no charges were actually made against Burton for these children and for Candace. and he and Candace did get divorced. However, it would later be found that he was convicted of the sexual assault of his next family and was put into prison in South Dakota for this. But Candace had moved on to Chuck with her 4 children, and according to Angelique, she thought that, Chuck was going to be the dad that they had always wanted, a good dad. But not long after, Monique realized that he wasn't much better. You see, Monique was 15, almost 16 at the time, and she was known as this beautiful, kind girl with a generous spirit. She was much more likely to take care of others than herself, as many eldest siblings are. Her sister said she was electric, she was fun and beautiful, and always protected her siblings. Monique was extremely intelligent, she was independent, and she planned on becoming a doctor. But as a 15-year-old, Monique was also a bit rebellious, especially in the eyes of her mother and her stepfather. You see, when Chuck had told Candace that Monique was gone, that June 2nd, he wasn't very panicked. He was very calm, and he simply stated this to her. Now, Monique had run away prior to this, and back then, Candace and Chuck were said to immediately drive around town, calling all of her friends, trying to locate her, and eventually, Monique did return back home after one of her best friends told her that she should. The reason that Monique had run away this first time wasn't simply just due to teenage angst, though. It turned out that Monique was found to be pregnant by her mother and her stepfather, and when they found out, they had forced her to have an abortion. But this time it was unknown if there was a reason she had run away, if it was still due to the prior runaway, or what in the world had happened. So in January of 1993, when Leslie was going to the police department, she was demanding answers from Candace and Chuck, and that's when they said that they believed that she'd simply run away once again when they were out of the house with the kids, because the last time she had come back on her own free will, she was completely fine, so they didn't report her missing this time. Now it had been over half a year, and so Leslie was pressing them, especially her sister Candace, about why nothing was ever done and the police weren't ever told. Suspiciously, only 2 days after Leslie was doing all of this pressing, Candace called Leslie and told her that Monique had actually called home after 7 months and talked to her younger sister Angelique, and she told Angelique that she was safe. Now, Leslie still wasn't satisfied, but then a week after that, she was given physical proof that Monique was okay. You see, Candace claimed that a letter had come to her home postmarked from Dallas, Texas, and this letter was handwritten, signed Monique Daniels. Now, Monique claimed that she had actually gotten married and had a daughter named Chelsea, and that her husband's job allowed them to travel around the world, and they were often moving, but they were in Alaska at the moment. Another letter then came to the Daniels residence from Monique about 8 months later in September of 1993. But at this point, it had been a year and 3 months since Monique had last been seen. So Leslie, who had decided to stop pressing the parents who were not giving any information, especially since the letters had been sent, decided to actually go back to the police because she wanted the handwriting to be observed to see if this was actually Monique's handwriting. She theorized that her own sister Candace had written those letters. However, she would need to get the letters from Candace first, so she asked Candace to meet her at the police department. Candace agreed, though coincidentally, just a day prior, there was a burglary at the Daniels home. Furniture was tipped over, things were stolen, such as CDs, and the letters were also missing. Leslie was back to square one and becoming infuriated with her sister. In January 1994, a year and 7 months since Monique had last been seen, Angelique could no longer keep all of the secrets that she had been forced to keep inside. Angelique would run away from home, got on a bus, and headed to her Aunt Leslie's house in Michigan. She sobbed, thinking about having to leave her brothers behind, and as soon as her aunt got her from the bus station that day, everything spilled out. Angelique explained that her parents, Chuck and Candace, were extremely strict. They ran their home like drill sergeants, and that they often fought, and the abuse would trickle down to the children. Candace would also allegedly order Chuck to beat them. She remembered that the first time Monique had run away, that they were looking for her every single day. Every time the phone rang, they ran to it, then they went outside to see if they could locate her. But that the second time, everything was different. The day of Monique's disappearance, when Angelique, Brian, and Candace all returned home from the choir trip, Angelique noticed that something was off. Now, she had noticed on the trip that her mother was very quiet, which was unusual, but then, when they walked in the door and Chuck told them Monique was gone, Candace only said, "Really?" and it seemed like it was in such an unnatural way of answering that sort of comment. But the house was also a mess, and it was usually kept very orderly. There were beer cans and cigarettes lying around, and that is when Angelique went to the bathroom, and she said there was an empty pregnancy test box on the counter. There wasn't a panic from the parents either, and Angelique could hear them saying that if she wanted to be home, she would be home. Suddenly, Angelique went from being the second oldest at 13 years old to the oldest of the home and to protecting her younger siblings. She said during this time her mother Candace was acting weird all of the time and suddenly had all of this interest in her life that she had never had before. Eventually, Angelique said that the family began to act like Monique had never existed at all. Only a few months after she allegedly ran away again, her siblings were told not to talk about her, not to ever mention her. And then suddenly the photos of Monique were being taken down, family pictures were being retaken without her, and those were placed up instead. Her entire room was packed into boxes, and Angelique then heard Chuck saying that with Monique being gone, everything was better and it was much more tranquil. But Angelique just wanted her sister back. Though Angelique didn't have to wonder whether these letters that had come from Monique were actually from her sister, because she knew that they weren't. Because one of her parents had come to her prior to that and asked her to write a letter signed by her sister. Angelique had written those letters postmarked from Dallas, Texas. She had gone with Chuck to the grocery store to pick out stationery, and then he told her exactly what to write. She was also forced to call family members and tell them that Monique had called her and told her that she was safe, a phone call that never happened. Angelique had been told by her father Chuck that her mother was suicidal due to Monique running away, and that this letter would help her heal, and that if she ever admitted to doing this, Angelique would go to jail. So together they drove all the way to Dallas to mail these letters. And hearing all of the threatening that Chuck was doing as far as sending her to jail, Angelique began to fear that her father had done something to Monique that he had always threatened the girls with. Now, this was to send them to military school for girls who needed discipline. It was something that Chuck was telling them often that he would do to straighten up their behavior when they were acting out. And Chuck would tell them that there was a place where girls like them would be sent when they behaved badly. So Angelique kept her mouth shut. She feared going to jail, and she feared going to this military school. And she also said that she feared the police as well, because she had been there when an officer had helped her parents record a phone call with Leslie, the aunt between Leslie and Angelique, in order to file a civil lawsuit against her. Now, of course, hearing all this for the first time, Aunt Leslie began to freak out. She was pondering what Chuck could have done with Monique, and Angelique, who was so focused on not going to military school, not being sent there like her sister was, she hadn't thought of the other possibility that Chuck had killed her sister. Angelique, under the care of her Aunt Leslie, then called her grandfather, who was Candace's father, and began to tell him everything that she had just told Leslie. And now, according to Angelique, who commented on a Reddit post by Anastasia Beverhausen, I'll link it below, the grandfather recorded this conversation between the two of them and then took it to a church and asked Candace to come and listen. Now, they played it for her to see her reaction, and Candace allegedly stood up and said that Angie was a liar. She then ran out of the room and called Chuck and began to say, "Get out of there. They're on to you." Candace's family was there to try to get Candace away from Chuck as well as the other kids, but when they went to the home, Chuck was actually gone and he had taken his guns. Angelique and Leslie were told about this because they had to go into hiding because everyone feared that Chuck was coming after them. Now, 3 days later, he returned to the Daniels residence and told them that he had planned on shooting himself, but that Jesus appeared and told him not to end his life. Candace's family left at that point, not getting the police involved, not able to get Candace and the children away. But unlike with Monique's disappearance, when Angelique had run away, they went to the police department and filed a missing persons report for her immediately. Curiously enough, they also then filed one for Monique as well, almost 2 years after her disappearance. This report from Monique said that she was last seen wearing a large military-style green or brown flight jacket, a men's diamond ring with tape on it so it fit her, and blue wire framed glasses. She had a 3-inch scar on her chin, a mole on her upper left side of her lip, and a half-moon-shaped scar on the outside of her left ankle. She was 5'4", 125 pounds with brown sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. Investigators then learned about what the neighbor had seen that day, which was that he was outside mowing when he had seen Monique get into this truck. However, Angelique would then look back on the weather for that specific day and found that it was raining all day, which is an unusual time for somebody to mow their lawn, and so Angelique believes that this neighbor was either paid or involved in whatever happened. But once Chuck and Candace heard that Angelique hadn't just run away, she had gone to her Aunt Leslie, they demanded that she be extradited back home. However, Angelique, with the help of her aunt, then went to Child Protective Services to file a report against her parents for physical and mental abuse. Hearing this, a judge refused to extradite her, and Chuck and Candace actually pled no contest to the abuse charges. So next up, Angelique and Leslie then went to the media to tell their story, and they told every little secret that had been kept for the last 2 years. And with all of this, the Moore Police Department, back where the Daniels lived, questioned Candace and Chuck for the first time. They claimed that Angelique was mentally unstable and unreliable, and that she and both her brother Andrew had substance abuse issues. However, Candace and Chuck gave conflicting statements and refused to take lie detector tests, even though Chuck did admit that he forced Angelique to write the letters and to lie about that call. Now, after this whole story was covered on A Current Affair and Angelique was very outspoken about what she believed had happened, her whole family, including her 4 brothers and her parents, moved to Germany, except for Angelique and Monique. Now, this was allegedly due to Chuck being transferred with the military to Germany to another military base. However, Andrew, one of the sons, who was 13 at the time, hadn't wanted to go. He had called Angelique. He wanted to run away. He had tried to, but he was forced to move to Germany with them because he was so young. And the family would stay there for the next 10 years. Meanwhile, Angelique, who was still in Michigan with her aunt, had tried to move on with her life, knowing that her sister had vanished and she still didn't know where she was. So she grew up, she got married, and her sister's disappearance was always in the back of her mind, and the probability that her parents were involved weighed on her. But in 2000, one of her brothers, who was still in Germany, was sent to live with Angelique. And this was because their parents said they could no longer handle him. So 8 years after the disappearance, this boy was living with her, and at the time, he would allegedly tell her that he remembered that day of Monique's disappearance when Chuck had locked all 3 of the boys who were at home that he was watching in a room together. But he came back and he took one of them on a truck ride. And this was in the middle of the night. And this boy said that there was an oil barrel in the back of Chuck's truck and a garbage bag full of clothes. He left the other kids home alone for about 2 days. The boy didn't remember much of what had happened, other than he thinks that they tossed the clothes in a ditch and then they buried the drum elsewhere. Throughout the years, Angelique, when she had time with the boys, didn't push them on that night to remember because of how traumatizing it would be and how much it did affect them. But throughout the years, their memories did start to fade and they did not remember much of anything. By 2013, 21 years, over 2 decades since Monique had vanished, when pretty much none of the boys really talked about that time, knew much about it, probably their trauma pushed it down, that is when Angelique would get a call from her brother, Andrew, who was also an adult at this time. He was sobbing on the phone, and he began to explain that he had seen what had happened in that home when Angelique, Brian, and Candace were out on that trip. He cried, and he said, "I was there." She wasn't talking. Now, Monique's brother, Andrew, would finally speak out, and this memory had overcome him, and he was one of those children who was under Chuck's care during that week. He was 11 at the time, and Andrew said that Monique and Chuck were arguing that day, and it was a huge fight. And then he remembers being told by Chuck that they were going on a fishing trip. Now, it was raining, and he was told, the boys were all told, that they could go say goodbye to Monique, but they were only able to see her through her cracked bedroom door and didn't actually hear from her. Now, Andrew remembered being able to see her sitting cross-legged on the floor, not moving. Looking back at that point, Andrew said when they left for the fishing trip, it was pouring outside and they didn't have their fishing poles. They drove for about 2 hours, stopped at a McDonald's, got something to eat, and went home. The kids knew better than to throw a fit or ask questions, but when they arrived home, the 3 boys were told to stay in the truck, and an hour later they were let inside of the home, and that is when Andrew, who had to go to the bathroom so badly, ran into the bathroom to use it, and he felt like he wasn't alone. Now, Chuck was watching him this whole time, and he also felt like there was someone else in the room. And so he went to pull back the shower curtain, and that is when Chuck dragged him out of the room. Chuck then told the 3 boys to go into their room, and he locked them inside and told them he was going to look for Monique. But he didn't come back for days, and Andrew said that he doesn't remember much of what happened after that. However, Charles Jr. claimed that he had seen Monique when she was still alive, that before they left for fishing, he went to hug her, and she was in her bed and telling him that she was sorry she couldn't go because she was sick. Now, Charles Jr. and Andrew were said to be the 2 that were kept locked in that room, and then the other brother, who is unnamed, was actually taken with Chuck, allegedly, throughout that night to do whatever they went to do. Now, after Andrew came forward to Angelique with this, they went to the police department, and the Moore Police Department decided to obtain a search warrant for the Daniels property. Now, of course, they no longer lived there, so any evidence inside would have been gone, but they were hoping to dig up the property in the back, and this was because there had been rumors that Monique had been buried in her backyard. However, they dug this up and were unable to locate any sort of human remains or evidence. Now, slowly throughout the years, these boys turned grown men. They didn't have many memories, but sometimes they would come up, and that is when one of the brothers, it's not said who, but in 2014, one of the brothers went to Angelique and told her that before Monique had vanished during that trip where, Angelique, Brian, and the mother were out at the choir trip, Monique had come into his bedroom crying in the middle of the night and asked him to come and stay in her room so that their dad didn't come in again. And Chuck allegedly came in while the boy was with Monique and told him to get back into bed. As he did so, Chuck went inside of Monique's room and shut the door. This boy also claimed that he had remembered that when Chuck came home after those 2 days of going to look for Monique when they were locked in the bedroom, that he had smelled really bad. He was very dirty. He then hugged them and was crying, and his brother said that he now believes that Chuck had poured acid on Monique's body that he could get from the military base to make sure that she could never be identified. And then this brother allegedly also watched Chuck pour acid on the garage floor and repaint it within months of all of this. Angelique has said, "I believe that Charles Daniels killed my sister Monique, and then I believe he put her in an oil drum, he drove her out to where he took her to, and he buried her there." She mentioned that she believes that her mother knows everything, but when she asks her to tell her the truth, she says nothing. In 2016, Chuck and Candace were still married. They were now living in Florida, and Candace is said to be a middle school teacher. Now, the Crime Watch Daily News was able to locate them for an interview, kind of more of an ambush as they went into their home, and Candace told the reporters, "Whatever happened, it's in God's hands." She also said Angelique is a really messed up lady and they shouldn't use her as a source. Then she asked them to leave, and that is when Chuck was pulling up and he said the same exact thing. Neither had anything else to say. Neither Chuck nor Candace has been charged in the disappearance or the murder of Monique Daniels, nor have they even been named suspects. Unfortunately, Chuck died in January 2019 of colon cancer without giving any sort of deathbed confession. Many have theorized that Chuck could have been essaying Monique, possibly causing her to get pregnant, which then he forced her to have an abortion for, which caused her to run away that first time. Possibly the secret for the horrific things he had done was the motive for murder. Some have theorized that her death was another abortion gone wrong at home. Angelique said she wants her sister to be known as more than what happened to her, so she actually shared a little story that the 2 of them were often duetting. They loved singing together, and their favorites were Janet Jackson and Madonna. But she feels guilty in participating in the cover-up even though she was a child, but she feels like someone has to be Monique's voice because she doesn't have a voice, so she can't stop looking for her. Monique Daniels would be 47 today. And Detective Terrence Coleman has said that they don't know, even today, if she was a runaway or the victim of foul play, but they hope she's still alive. If it's true that Candace knows she is the only hope at this point in finding answers, but will she ever give it up? These siblings, though, are survivors, not only for what they experienced with this alleged abuse, but also being there that night of the alleged murder, some forcefully being involved in the cover-up, and having to relive that throughout their lives even when they didn't want to. And they still don't have answers 31 years later. What do you believe happened to Monique? Is there a chance she just ran away? Is she still alive today? Will she ever be found? And I think Monique deserves to just be laid to rest. It's disgusting to me that her own mother won't allow that to happen. So if you know anything about this case, Chuck or Candace had mentioned something in the years following, if you are knowledgeable about what happened, please call the police department. I will have the numbers down below. Please send it anonymously, send it however you want, but please let Angelique get answers for her sister after all of this time. And I just want to let Angelique know, if she by some chance watches this, that it is not her fault by any means that she participated in this cover-up. She was forced to. She was scared out of her mind if she didn't do that. She thought she was helping her mother as well to get through this. She couldn't have said no. And unfortunately, she couldn't have prevented this either. It is not these siblings' fault for what they did or didn't do during that time. They are survivors. Please let me know down below what you believe happened, and don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces.